Last chapter. The sound of drums and gongs. The heat of the summer had begun in earnest. At noon, the sun scorched overhead, and the familiar slow drone of the popsicle man floated in through the open windows, accompanied by the rhythmic clap of a wooden block on a box. Ice cold popsicles, green bean popsicles, red bean popsicles, ice cold popsicles. My hands sweated so much holding the wool that I could not knit. Instead, I worked on embroidering a pillow sham as I waited for the cool of the evening. In the distance, I could hear the sound of drums and gongs. There was a tension in the air that even we children felt. The newspapers and radio were full of the campaign the campaign to destroy the four olds. The campaign had been expanded to eliminate personal possessions. If we do not completely eliminate the roots, the plant will grow back, we heard. We must eradicate these relics of the past. We must not allow the reactionary forces to hold their treasures. And every day we heard drums and gongs that meant the Red Guards were ransacking the houses of class enemies to find and confiscate their hoarded possessions. One day the drums and gongs approached closer than I ever heard them before. Ji Yun and her classmate Xiao Hong Yin ran into the house full of the news. "It's a search party, all right," Ji Yun shouted. "They came from Old Man Wrong's factory in trucks, and they posted Dad Zabao. Come on, let's go and see." She dragged me down the stairs. The crowd was already gathering at number 11, Old Mr. Wrong's house. Two dark trucks blocked the entry. The sides of the trucks were covered with red banners that said things like sweep away all the reactionary monsters and destroy the four olds and establish the four news. The big iron gate in the front of the building was closed, but there was an unusual clamor coming from inside the house. The indistinct shouts of the Red Guards mingled with the furious barking of Mrs. Wrong's huge dog. We could only imagine what was going on inside. A Dad Zabao was posted on the gate, and a solemn crowd had gathered around to read it, wiping their faces with handkerchiefs and shading their heads with palm leaf fans. Duhai's mother was there, along with another neighborhood party officer. I pushed my way between the people so I could read the Dad Zabao. Though the capitalist Rong Defeng has died, his widow still lives on his ill-gotten gains. The factories in which her husband exploited the masses have been returned to their rightful owners, the workers and the people's government. Yet the reactionary monster still lives on the blood of the workers. Instead of admitting her crimes and striving to atone for her sins, Old Lady Wrong has sent her sons to Hong Kong, where they can continue to exploit the Chinese people, and she herself continues to flaunt her bourgeois life. The Red Guards have determined to eradicate the roots of this noxious weed in order to promote Chairman Mao's revolutionary cause. I had never seen a search except in the movies. I knew that they were the only way we were going to get rid of the four olds, once and for all. Still, there was something about the idea that made me nervous. Ji Yun pulled on my arm. "Ji Li, what does noxious mean?" Before I could answer her, Grandma was on my shoulder. "Ji Li, help me carry this bag. Ji Yun, come along home now." She hustled us away. Ji Yun was still jabbering excitedly, but Grandma was stern. "You children stay in the house this afternoon, you hear? There's nothing for you to gawk at." When Ji Young came back in, he was thrilled too. He had spent part of the day in the park and had missed some of the excitement. I saw them driving away a truck just full of stuff. "I'm going back to see what else they got." "They'll do nothing of the kind," Grandma said sharply. "Those poor people have enough to worry about without your going to stare at them." I was not sure who Grandma was worried about, the Red Guards or Mrs. Wrong, but it was clear that she did not want us involved. All that afternoon I was restless. I pictured Mrs. Wrong sitting under guard, cursing because her four olds were being found. I imagined the searchers ransacking the trunks and drawers and drilling holes into the walls to look for hidden valuables. It seemed both inspiring and scary. When Grandma asked me to buy her some soy sauce, I could not help seizing the opportunity to go past number 11 and take another look. People just getting home from work had swelled the crowd at the gate. Some of them were clustering in front of the Dad Zabao, but many more were talking in small groups. Children ran up and down the alley, around and through the knots of people. One boy dared to hit a gong, and the clang startled everyone. The alley fell into silence. Everyone turned to look at the boy, and he scurried to stand behind his father. The conversation continued in hushed tones. "This is no surprise to me," said a woman I recognized as the housekeeper from number 9. Every day when she went out, all dolled up, I said to myself, "She's heading for a fall." Last New Year's, she went out with a new diamond ring bigger than I had ever saw before. Another old woman said, Mrs. Fong's housekeeper told me that there were over 3 carats, and the clothes she had made in Hong Kong. Every time someone else got a new dress, you could be sure Mrs. Wrong would get a prettier one. Yes, and the taxicabs and the dinners, and mahjong all night sometimes. I moved closer to the Dazabao on the gate. They said she had hundreds of thousands of yuan in the bank. I heard 1 million. My uncle worked in one of his factories before liberation, and he knew all about Old Wrong. This was Mr. Ni, the man we called Six Fingers because of the extra finger on his right hand. He lived in one of the converted garages in our alley. The antiques they carried out a while ago must have been worth 1 million all by themselves. And there was that trunk full of gold bars. They could hardly carry it. There was satisfaction in their voices. The gate opened with a loud clang and I jumped. 8 men struggled out with a huge mahogany 4-poster bed. It was just like Mom and Dad's bed, with a mirror at the headboard surrounded by carved dragons. Most of the crowd murmured in admiration, but I also heard an indignant snort. Typical capitalist, said a ragged-looking old woman. I blushed. Our family had a capitalist bed too. I turned and made my way out of the crowd. The sound of drums and gongs grew near again. I saw Grandma wince. Who is it this time? She muttered. You children stay in the house this afternoon. She wearily turned back to the kitchen. Everyone could identify the sounds of a search, and we had grown an expert at locating them in the neighborhood. After 6 more searches had been conducted in our alley, they were no longer exciting, but the adults I knew grew more and more tense. Only Ji Yong was still enthusiastic about them. He always seemed to know the latest stories. The housekeeper at number 18 told the searchers that there were gold bars hidden in the toilet tank, he laughed. And at number 27, where Lou's mistress lives, they found his wife's jewelry. And the most riveting of all, they found real weapons at number 38. His voice was hushed with excitement. They went up into the attic and looked in the old chimney, and they found a gun. Do you know what else? Sanpopo added, really speaking to Grandma rather than us. 6 Fingers is always at every search. He's too sick to go to work at the light bulb factory, but he's not too sick to go to every search and carry things out. He has all the roughest little children organized into a kind of posse to help keep order. He says he's proud to be doing his part. Grandma raised her head, but I heard no response. It was hard to imagine where Song Popo heard so much news. When neighbors ran into each other, they did not stop to chat, but just nodded and hurried on. Everyone felt vulnerable, and no one wanted to say anything that would cause trouble. We children were warned to stay close to home and come back at once if a search occurred. Only some of the few working class people in the alley still seemed excited when they heard the drums and gongs. In other years, summer vacation had been a happy time. In the daytime, we went to the pool or to the movies or to the park to turn somersaults and roll on the grass. Evenings, we sat in the alley with the neighbors and listened to stories. We would watch the moon and sing and giggle until very late. Now things are different. Anne Yi had been sent away to spend the summer with her grandparents in Shandong, away from Shanghai's turbulence. I missed her terribly. I saw hardly any kids in the neighborhood. No one came out to play. There seemed to be no laughter in the alley, just a growing, choking tension. Things got so bad that Mom and Dad decided to dismiss Song Popo. I heard Mom speaking to her in the kitchen. We really hate to let you go, but if the Red Guards found out, they would accuse us of exploiting working people. Mom's voice sounded uncomfortable. She paused for a moment, then continued, we want to give you this in thanks. That evening, Song Popo carried a small bag downstairs with her. Her eyes were red, and she seemed even more hunchbacked than usual. I did not know why she seemed so sad. Song Popo was part of the family, and it was good that she was not working for us. It meant we were not exploiting her. I thought of everything Song Popo had done for us. On rainy days, she would meet us at the school gate with 3 pairs of boots in a plastic bag and 2 umbrellas under her arm. She often was half soaked when we got home, but we were always perfectly dry. When we ate up all the sweets Grandma bought us and wanted more, Song Popo would buy us a popsicle or a sweet roll out of her own limited funds. Unlike other housekeepers, Song Popo could read, not only books, but music too. Sometimes when we passed her door, we would see her sitting in her wicker chair with a music book in her hand, humming a folk song from her hometown. Ji Yong and Ji Yun would throw themselves into her lap and try to sing along, while I would stand behind her and play with her naturally curly hair. My 4th aunt once told me that people with naturally curly hair were fated to suffer, and that was certainly true in Song Popo's case. She had come from a wealthy family, but her husband had committed suicide after his business went bankrupt. All their money went to pay his debts, and she had had to become a housekeeper. It was very sad, and when I remembered this, I was even happier that we were no longer exploiting her. She still lived in the small room downstairs. We could still visit her and play with her fascinating hair, but we no longer heard her happy humming, and she no longer brought us treats or met us with umbrellas when it rained. With Song Popo gone, there was a lot more work for us to do. Excited at the idea of getting up and going out at dawn, I volunteered to buy meat and vegetables at the market. This was the hardest job, but considering Grandma's age, she was over 70, and Mom and Dad's busy schedules, I felt it was my duty. It was also a good chance to get rid of my remaining bourgeois habits. For the first few days, I was overwhelmed. I couldn't identify some of the vegetables I was supposed to buy. I couldn't tell if the fish was fresh or not. Most of all, facing so many people and so many lines, I was totally lost. Each item had its own line, and everything was first come, first served. Often, after standing in a long line for one vegetable, I found that everything else I needed was sold out. Even items that required ration coupons ran out early.